The marble light of the Metropolitan Museum glittered like a jewel box that evening, its grand staircase awash in gowns stitched with thousands of sequins and tuxedos cut to precision. Music from a string quartet curled upward through the vaulted ceilings, merging with the laughter of New York's most pedigreed families. The Harringtons were in their element, Evelyn with her diamond bracelet flashing each time she lifted her flute of champagne, Charles distractedly scanning his phone for market updates, Liam already streaming behind-the-scenes content for his followers, and Sophia holding court with her Instagram live audience. Into this curated perfection stepped Naomi Carter. Her dress was simple, black, elegant, and understated, but not designed by any house that could be found along Madison Avenue. Her heels clicked lightly against the marble floor as she moved through the hall with a calmness that seemed to unsettle those who thrived on spectacle. She carried herself with grace, but in a room built to measure worth by labels and last names, grace alone was not enough. Evelyn Harrington saw her first. With the predatory ease of someone who had spent decades policing invisible lines of status, she reached out and gripped Naomi's arm. "Get this trash out of here before she humiliates us all," she hissed, her voice loud enough for the nearest guest to hear. She shoved Naomi backward into a champagne table, crystal glasses rattling in protest. Liam's reflex was instantaneous. His phone was already up, the red record light burning. "This is gold," he whispered, zooming in on Naomi's startled face. "Going straight to TikTok." Sophia snatched the ivory-colored invitation from Naomi's hand before she could recover, waving it like a hunter displaying a kill. "Look, everyone," she called out, her voice dripping in amusement. "A little girl decided to play dress-up with a fake ticket." She ripped it in half with theatrical flair, letting the pieces scatter to the floor like confetti at a parade. Laughter rippled around them as phones angled in, capturing humiliation from every possible view. Naomi bent to pick up the torn fragments. Her hands trembled, but there was a composure in the way she knelt, grace in the midst of cruelty. The Harringtons encircled her with their phones, their wealth and breeding now reduced to nothing more than digital vultures circling their prey. "Ladies and gentlemen," Evelyn announced, her tone high and clear, as though she were leading a stage play, "we have ourselves a gate crasher." She turned to the crowd of 200 gathered in silken clusters. "Some people don't understand what exclusive means." The room shifted. Guests who had been chatting near the silent auction displays now craned their necks. Their curiosity piqued. The Harringtons knew how to turn spectacle into sport. Liam's feed was already climbing past 20,000 viewers. Sophia's comments flooded with heart emojis and cruel jokes. "This is secondhand embarrassment," she whispered to her phone. "Like, I can't even—" The museum's head of security, Officer Grant Miller, finally pushed through the circle, his expression tight. Behind him trailed Dr. Rebecca Lawson, the director of the museum, her tablet clutched close to her chest. "Ma'am," Miller said quietly to Naomi, "I'll need to verify your invitation." Evelyn's laugh cut the air like glass. "Grant, darling, the proof is right at your feet. Torn paper, clearly counterfeit, probably printed at some copy shop in Queens." The circle tightened. Phones hovered like predator eyes. "Dr. Lawson tapped furiously on her tablet, pulling up donor lists. She muttered under her breath. "Williams Foundation table, platinum sponsor, 100,000 contribution. Anyone can claim a foundation name." Liam interrupted smoothly for his stream. "Dad, didn't you handle corporate security? Tell them about identity theft?" Charles Harrington, finally noticing the commotion, pushed forward, his phone buzzing relentlessly in his hand. "What's going on here? I have the Williams tech signing at 9 tomorrow. I don't have time for—" "Handle your calls later." "Charles," Evelyn snapped, "is sharp enough to cut the space. We're managing a social emergency." Naomi stood at last, the torn invitation carefully pieced together in her palm. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding about why I'm here tonight." "Misunderstanding?" Sophia's laughter was harsh. She spun her phone toward her face and her audience. "No, sweetheart. There's no confusion. You don't belong here. This isn't a church bake sale. This is a $10,000 a plate gala. The comments on her stream surged. Kick her out. This is painful. Why is security so slow? But not everyone was entertained. Judge Helen Porter's husband quietly filmed from a corner, his frown deepening with every cruel word. Beside him, Dr. Angela Reynolds leaned toward him and whispered, "This feels wrong. They're enjoying this too much." Evelyn's ears caught the whisper. She turned, her smile sharp. "Angela, surely you understand. Standards must be maintained. Otherwise, what's the point of nights like this?" "Appropriate boundaries," Dr. Reynolds repeated, her voice calm but edged with disdain. "Or simply convenient prejudices." The tension shifted. A few guests glanced at each other, uneasy. But Liam, sensing hesitation, pressed harder for his audience. Sometimes reality hurts. People, not everyone gets to live the dream. His feed rocketed toward 50,000 views. Officer Miller cleared his throat again. "Miss, if you have another form of identification..." Evelyn cut him off with a raised hand. "Enough. The Harringtons have given this museum over $2 million. Our word should be all the proof you need. Look at her. Do you really believe she belongs here?" She gestured at Naomi's simple attire. A dress from Target, shoes from Payless. This is humiliating. For everyone. Naomi's phone buzzed inside her clutch. The screen lit briefly. Dad, Daniel Carter. 12 missed calls. She ignored it, slipping the phone back inside. "Even her phone calls are disruptive," Evelyn snapped, seizing on the moment. "Exactly what I mean about behavior in civilized society." The crowd murmured. "Call security. End this." Someone whispered, "This is too much." But Naomi remained still, her poise unsettling in its quiet strength. She didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't beg. She simply stood in the eye of their cruelty, holding fragments of torn paper like evidence. And then she spoke, softly but clear enough to cut through the marble hall. "I think it's time I made a phone call." The air froze. She tapped speed dial. The ring carried across the silence like a drumbeat. "Hi, Dad," Naomi said, her voice calm as glass. "Yes, I'm still at the museum. I think you should hear how the Harrington family treats people like us." The ripple through the crowd was instant. Phones that had been gleeful in their recording now trembled, hands suddenly unsteady. Dr. Lawson's tablet slipped an inch in her grip as she scanned the sponsorship records again. Her lips parted, horrified. "Daniel Carter. Carter Foundation. Oh my God." Charles's phone buzzed violently in his hand. He looked down. "Daniel Carter. Urgent." He declined the call, sweat prickling his temple. Guests began whispering, "Daniel Carter? Williams Tech rival? Billionaire investor?" Naomi kept her gaze locked on Evelyn. "They tore up the invitation our foundation sent, called it fake, said I was worthless, said I didn't belong in civilized society." Liam's live stream captured his own face draining of color. The comments shifted violently. "Wait, Carter? As in the Daniel Carter? This family is finished." Sophia's phone trembled. She ended her stream in panic, but it was too late. 40,000 had seen, and hundreds had screen recorded. Charles whispered, barely audible. "The Carter deal. Our last chance. $750 million. The museum doors boomed open, echoing through the chamber. Silence fell like a blade. Daniel Carter stepped inside. 6'2", Tom Ford's suit, flanked by 2 attorneys and his lead advisor. His gaze found Naomi first. "Are you all right?" She nodded once. "I'm fine. Dad, just educated." Daniel's eyes moved to the Harringtons. Evelyn's diamonds seemed to dim. Charles paled. Liam's phone slipped in his shaking hands. Sophia looked as if she'd been drained of all color. "Charles," Daniel said, his tone calm but lethal. "I've heard interesting things about your family tonight. And in that instant, the marble hall was no longer a gala. It was a courtroom. The jury, 200 elite guests with phones still recording. The sentence, already in motion. The hush that fell over the museum's marble atrium was suffocating, as though the vaulted ceilings themselves were waiting for judgment. Daniel Carter did not rush his steps. He moved through the parting crowd with the quiet assurance of a man who had learned long ago that true power required no performance. The room bent around him. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Glasses of champagne froze halfway to lips. Even the glittering chandeliers seemed to dim. Naomi remained where she was, the torn invitation still in her hand. She hadn't moved since her call, and that calm defiance only magnified the tension. Daniel stopped beside her, his hand brushing her shoulder in silent confirmation before turning to the Harringtons. Charles Harrington tried for composure. Sweat had gathered above his brow, but his voice reached for smoothness. Daniel, this is a misunderstanding, a complete misunderstanding. Daniel's tone was quiet, but it carried, slicing through the crowd with surgical precision. I received 17 missed calls from my daughter tonight, calls she made while your family mocked her, filmed her, and tore up her invitation. Evelyn stepped forward, attempting to reclaim control, her voice still laced with the brittle steel of old money arrogance. Daniel, had we known Naomi was your daughter, none of this would have... Stop. Daniel's voice was ice. This isn't about failing to recognize who she is. It's about recognizing what you saw. A young black woman in a simple dress, and you decided that made her unworthy of respect. Liam's TikTok was still live. Red recording light glaring like an accusation. Over 100,000 viewers were watching, the comments spiraling out of control. They're screwed. Legendary downfall. Keep streaming. His hands shook as he fumbled to end it, but his panic only made the feed more raw. Daniel's assistant stepped forward, sleek tablet in hand. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice crisp, professional. We've gathered live documentation from tonight. 4 TikTok uploads by Liam Harrington, total viewership exceeding 300,000. A 37-minute Instagram live from Sophia Harrington, averaging 43,000 concurrent viewers. Content includes racial mockery, humiliation, and direct incitement of security to remove Ms. Carter. Sophia's knees nearly buckled. I was just entertaining your audience? Daniel's eyes cut to her, then to Evelyn. You broadcast cruelty like a performance, and now you're shocked the world is watching. Dr. Rebecca Lawson, the museum director, broke in, her face pale. Mr. Carter, please, let me say, this institution had no knowledge of their actions. Daniel lifted one hand, silencing her. Dr. Lawson, you're not on trial tonight, but your response will be... He turned back to the Harringtons. Let's talk numbers. The words chilled Charles more than any insult could. Daniel's voice was deceptively calm as he continued. Ashford Industries, he paused, correcting himself with quiet precision. Harrington Industries, current debt load, $1.2 billion. Stock value collapsed 73% this fiscal year. Quarterly losses, $89 million. Without the Williams Tech partnership, you have, what, 67 days before bankruptcy? The silence was surgical. Guests glanced at their phones, verifying figures in real time. Charles felt his legs weaken. Those numbers weren't public. Daniel, Charles began, but his voice cracked. 67 days, Daniel repeated softly. That's how long you have left if this partnership dissolves. He let the weight hang. With it, your projections showed profitability within 18 months. But that was before tonight. The assistant tapped her tablet again. Board members of Carter Global are on standby. Mr. Carter, they've reviewed the documentation? Daniel's gaze returned to Charles. You've built your empire on image. Charles, tonight, your family broadcast an image to the world, one of prejudice, arrogance, and cruelty. Tell me, what investor, what customer, what employee would want to be part of that culture now? Phones in the crowd caught everything. Hundreds of elite witnesses, their lenses like unblinking eyes. The Harringtons, once predators, now prey in a cage of their own making. Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper, audible only because the hall was so silent. Please, this partnership is everything. Our employees, you should have thought of your employees, Daniel cut in. Before turning my daughter into tonight's entertainment, Naomi finally spoke, her voice carrying clarity that silenced even the background murmurs. Dad, may I suggest something? All eyes turned to her. Evelyn's face twitched, hope, dread, both tangled together. Naomi's gaze was steady, directed not at her father, but at the Harringtons. They could choose a different path. Public accountability, not just apologies whispered in private, but spoken to everyone who witnessed this. A fund, $10 million, for organizations fighting discrimination, mandatory bias training for every executive, independent audits, and not one-time damage control. Quarterly, permanent. Sophia gasped. 10 million? That's extortion. No. Naomi's tone was like stone. That's tuition. The cost of learning what respect actually means. Daniel studied her face, his expression softening for just a heartbeat. Then he turned back to Charles. Those are her terms, and if you're not willing to meet them, then Harrington Industries will have 67 days to explain to its employees why their jobs disappeared, because their leaders couldn't treat one woman with dignity. The weight of the silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Finally, Charles's head bowed. We accept. Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. His board had postponed the emergency meeting to the next morning. 18 hours. 18 hours for the Harringtons to prove their promise wasn't just words. As Daniel and Naomi walked toward the museum doors, Liam's live stream captured their retreat. The comments were no longer cruel. They were electric, unified, legendary. Justice served. The perfect twist. And the Harringtons stood behind, surrounded by hundreds of cameras, the architects of their own public undoing. 6 months later, the same marble hall that had once witnessed Naomi Carter's humiliation looked almost unrecognizable. The chandeliers still glowed, the staircase still curved like a stage set, but the atmosphere had changed. Tonight wasn't a charity gala for exclusivity. It was the inaugural Carter-Harrington Responsibility Summit, a gathering that pulled in business leaders, diversity consultants, and civil rights advocates from across the country. The banner at the entrance carried both names. Though the order spoke volumes, Daniel Carter had insisted, Carter first, Harrington second. Yet the real surprise was who stood near the podium, waiting to address the crowd. The Harrington family, no longer adorned in glittering labels and smug superiority, but in plain navy and charcoal attire, their posture subdued, their expressions careful. Dr. Rebecca Lawson, the museum director, welcomed attendees with a voice steady but charged. 6 months ago, this institution witnessed an incident that could have destroyed reputations and livelihoods. Instead, it has become a catalyst for change. Her words carried not just apology, but a sense of rebirth, a chance to redefine what the museum symbolized. Charles Harrington stepped up next. He looked older, as if the last half year had stripped him of vanity and left only gravity. Tonight, he began, I don't want to speak in projections or market forecasts. I want to speak in facts, facts that reveal not just numbers, but culture. A screen behind him flickered on. Side by side, Harrington Industries' old statistics and the new. 6 months ago, Charles said, we had 3% minority leadership, 12% women in executive positions, and 0 minority-owned suppliers in our top vendor tier. Today, 31% minority leadership, 47% women executives, and 35% of our contracts now held by diverse suppliers. The crowd murmured, impressed, but Charles's voice cut through before they could linger. This is not charity. It is correction. It is overdue. Dr. Angela Reynolds stepped forward with him. Once merely a voice in the crowd resisting Evelyn's arrogance, she was now Harrington Industries' Chief Diversity Officer, recruited directly from Carter Global. These aren't cosmetic fixes, she explained. We dismantled practices that excluded voices for decades. We brought in auditors who don't answer to shareholders, but to communities. Behind her, the screen shifted to employee testimonials, faces of men and women who had once been invisible inside Harrington Industries, now promoted, celebrated, and heard. Evelyn Harrington was next. The same woman who had once commanded a gala crowd with cruelty now walked to the microphone with visible nerves. Gone were the diamonds, the glitter. She wore a simple navy dress. No jewelry but a small silver cross. Her voice trembled at first. I want to address the night that brought us here, she said. I tore up a young woman's invitation. I called her trash. I tried to erase her presence from a room she helped fund. I have spent the past months confronting not only what I did, but why I did it. She clicked the screen. A photo appeared. Evelyn in jeans and a plain sweater, serving meals at a Harlem community center. This is Rosa Alvarez. She worked 3 decades as a hotel maid. She taught me that dignity isn't something you can measure in labels. This is Michael James, a software engineer from the Bronx. He taught me intelligence doesn't come with a zip code. Her voice grew stronger. I cannot undo what I did to Naomi Carter, but I can spend the rest of my life ensuring it never happens again. Not from me, not from my family, not from the institutions we touch. The applause was hesitant at first, then genuine. Liam, once the gleeful live streamer, followed. He carried no champagne flute, no smug smile, only his phone. My videos that night reached millions. At first, I wanted to bury them, but I realized, let the world see, let them watch what privilege looks like when it thinks no one important is watching. I turned my account into something different. He held his phone up. Last week, I interviewed HBCU students about barriers in tech careers. 1.2 million views. Not mockery, education. Screens lit with clips. Him sitting in circles with students, listening instead of performing. His comments were filled with support, not cruelty. Sophia stood last among them. I lost nearly 90,000 followers overnight, but the people who remained wanted something better. I built a series called Privilege Check. It doesn't trend like fashion halls did, but it reaches 200,000 people every month with conversations about inequality, criminal justice, and access to education. Her screen flashed with posts, fundraisers, interviews with nonprofit leaders, collaborations with community activists. When Daniel Carter finally took the podium, his presence was as commanding as it had been 6 months earlier, but his voice warmer. The question I get most often, he began, is why give them a second chance? Why not simply cut ties and move on? He paused, scanning the audience. Because destruction is easy, transformation is hard, and transformation is what leaves a legacy. Behind him, the data appeared. The Carter-Harrington partnership had already generated over $1 billion in revenue and created nearly 2,500 jobs, 2/3 filled by candidates from underrepresented communities. Naomi was the last to speak. She walked forward in a black suit, confidence radiating. 6 months ago, I stood in this room being told I didn't belong. Today, I stand before executives who've reshaped their companies, students who've found scholarships, families who've been lifted because of change that began here. Her voice sharpened. The Harringtons' actions were inexcusable, but their response afterward has been extraordinary. Real change requires 2 things: accountability for the harm and commitment to growth. They accepted both. Images filled the screens. New scholarship recipients, promoted employees, contracts awarded to minority businesses. Then photos of Evelyn at a shelter, Liam mentoring teens, Sophia attending legal clinics. The applause this time was thunderous. The marble hall, once a stage for humiliation, now resonated with redemption. 2 years after the night at the museum, Naomi Carter stood before the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. The vast assembly hall glittered with the flags of 193 nations, translators whispering into headsets, cameras trained on the youngest keynote speaker in the history of the council. At just 27, Naomi's presence carried the weight of a global movement. 2 years ago, she began, her voice carrying clear across the chamber. I was humiliated at a charity gala by people who judged me only by the color of my skin and the simplicity of my dress. What they meant as entertainment for their followers became the spark for something larger, a reckoning that spread far beyond one family, one company, one city. Behind her, the screen displayed staggering statistics. Over 1,200 companies across continents had adopted the Carter Protocols, comprehensive accountability standards requiring bias training, independent audits, and transparent reporting on diversity. Corporate discrimination complaints had fallen by a third in those organizations. Minority hiring and leadership roles had nearly doubled. But numbers only tell part of the story, Naomi continued, her gaze sweeping the hall. The real change lives in the individuals, the employees promoted after years of being overlooked, the students who received scholarships, the entrepreneurs who finally received contracts once closed to them. The impact is not measured in balance sheets alone. It is measured in dignity restored. The transformation of the Harringtons themselves had become a symbol. Evelyn Harrington, once infamous for tearing up Naomi's invitation, now traveled monthly as a certified diversity consultant. Her memoir, The $750 million Lesson, Learning to See My Own Privilege, had become required reading in business ethics programs across dozens of universities. She began each seminar by showing the very footage of her own cruelty, forcing leaders to confront their blind spots as she had. Liam Harrington's TikTok account, once a platform of mockery, had grown into Check Your Privilege with over 3 million followers. His most popular series, Growing Up Rich and Wrong, was raw testimony of inherited arrogance dismantled through accountability. Clips of him mentoring inner-city teenagers in entrepreneurship went viral for entirely different reasons. They inspired instead of degrading. Sophia Harrington had enrolled in law school. Her once shallow Instagram now chronicled her work in civil rights clinics, fundraising campaigns for bail reform, and collaborations with grassroots activists. The same woman who had once sneered into her camera now used that lens to amplify voices long ignored. Charles Harrington, humbled more than any quarterly report could manage, addressed directors' associations with data that stunned skeptics. They predicted our reforms would slow efficiency and cost us millions. Instead, productivity rose 23%. Customer satisfaction jumped 31%. Our stock has outperformed the market by 67% in 2 years. The lesson is simple. Equity isn't charity. It is strategy. Dr. Angela Reynolds, now one of the most sought-after executives in corporate America, stood before Harvard Business School students explaining the shift. The Carter-Harrington model isn't about goodwill. It is about unlocking potential that prejudice had buried. When you remove bias, you unleash innovation, and innovation pays. The ripple effects spread across society. In healthcare, Dr. Reynolds launched Dignity in Medicine, training physicians to confront implicit bias in treatment. Judge Helen Porter reformed courtroom protocols, ensuring defendants were not judged by accent or attire. Legislation inspired by the Carter Protocols passed in Europe, Africa, and Australia, embedding accountability into law. Documentaries like Dignity Interrupted carried Naomi's story across languages and continents, winning awards and inspiring boardrooms. What began as a live-stream humiliation now lived as a case study in universities, a framework for corporations, and a moral checkpoint for communities worldwide. At the UN, Naomi's voice grew firm. Every one of us will face moments when we can diminish or dignify another. The question is not whether those moments come. They will. The question is what you will choose. Will you strip others to elevate yourself, or will you lift them, and in doing so, rise higher than you imagined possible? The assembly hall, usually a place of stiff protocol, sat in reverent silence. Delegates leaned forward, as though pulled by her words. She delivered her closing challenge not with grandeur, but with clarity. Your turn, Naomi said. Your workplaces, your communities, your families. Each of you holds influence. Use it to dismantle prejudice, to create inclusion, to hold yourselves accountable. Because justice is not a policy, it is a practice. Dignity is not granted, it is recognized. And the future we build will be measured not by the wealth we accumulate, but by the humanity we preserve. Applause rose, wave after wave, echoing against the chamber's domed ceiling. The girl once dismissed as trash at a gala now stood as a global voice of conscience. Her humiliation transformed into a movement that reshaped boardrooms and parliaments alike. In a quiet moment afterward, Daniel Carter placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "You turned pain into purpose," he said softly. "That's not just leadership. That's legacy." Naomi smiled, her eyes on the hall now buzzing with renewed energy. "Sometimes the most important revolutions," she replied, "don't begin in parliaments or boardrooms. They begin in a single moment of cruelty, met with courage.